Welcome back to Bullhorns and Bullseyes. Welcome, Curtis. How have you been?
I've been great.
Good.
How you been, Tom?
I've been good. Anxiously awaiting part 3 from our guest, Mario. We need to reintroduce everyone. Mario DeQuilla, Chief Operating Officer of Assisted Living Services in Connecticut. You think I'd have it right by now, huh, Mario?
Yeah, that was right, actually. So it was right on.
I just had to pause a little bit to make sure. So today we are going to revisit the topic that we've been talking about. This is installment 3. So if you've missed the 2 first parts, make sure you go back and either watch the videos or the preceding podcast episodes. Because today we are finally going to pay off what we've been loosely defining or describing as the Holy Grail of marketing, and that's how you tie in sales, measure ROI, all the things that so many people say are so difficult, if not impossible to do. Curtis, this is something that you and I have been talking at length about, and this is right in your wheelhouse, and that's closing that loop, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it sure is. I mean, yeah, so really, a lot of organizations will call this attribution, right? So you want to attribute sales, down the line sales, to marketing activities that are happening, up early on in the funnel. And I would say, 90%, if not closer to 100% of organizations are trying to do that every day to figure out what that ROI is. And you want to get as close as possible. It can never be perfect, but you want to try to do everything you can. And I think Mario's got a great story to share of how, some commitment to try to figure that out and putting the right tools and systems in place to do that and what it can do to your business. So.
Yeah, Mario, that was the cliffhanger we left people with last time, which was an aha moment that you had when it comes to measuring ad spend, equating ROI. You seem to be, from what I know of you, a very numbers and data-driven person. So you wanted to know, as you started to seeing results, the website was starting to generate leads. You wanted to understand with granularity, I think, how exactly, where exactly, how much exactly, so you could, I think, feed that data back into the marketing plan, was it not?
Yeah, exactly. And it was interesting. Curtis and I were talking off camera here and off podcast, but way back when, I think what we did was we saw it working, and in my kind of primitive brain back then, and still is now, but back then it was more primitive. I would say, let's just throw some more money at it, right? And let's see if that works. And to some extent it does, right? I mean, we increased the budget, year over year. And we saw some progress, right? Some results. But as we sort of evolved, if you will, I think it was Curtis, you said something interesting before. Customers come and say, you need more form fills. And it's not just that, it's how are they getting there, right? Where are you spending your money, right? Is it through just increasing your website's sort of aesthetic view? Is it spending more money on Google paid ads? Is it getting more content out there? What's really producing the results, right? And how do we measure whether or not putting $100,000 into writing blogs or producing content is actually gonna be a measurable result, right? So I know we really started looking into it, and we designed our Salesforce program to really track almost everywhere online where that lead came from, right? Different Google My Business campaigns, and now we're just starting to track things like commercials that are on Hulu and YouTube, where the customers are actually coming from in that respect. Are they coming more from YouTube, Hulu? Did they see this ad compared to that ad? And I think it's important to start tracking this for us and for other companies, because you can throw all your money into one particular aspect of online marketing, and it may work, but it's sort of this broad reach that we found more success in
Mhm.
doing, at least.
So Tom, if I could add to that, what we saw was from an analytics perspective, because we could track at least at a level of user behavior, not tied to the CRM, just what users were doing. That at least on mobile, there was a fair number of people who were clicking a phone number to call the business.
Mm.
But there's no tie back to that actual phone call happening to a specific person. So we see the phone call happen, but unless we took our analytics data by time and he took his phone system and got a printout of all the phone calls that came in every day and by time, and we matched them up with caller ID with the CRM, that'd be an extensive amount of work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of roughly anywhere from 150 to 200 calls a month that are just tied to web activities. There could be 1,000 phone calls coming in through his phone system, but of what we see happening is maybe 20% of that. So there are platforms out there, and these were conversations I had with Mario, basically saying like, look, there's a segment of data here that we could tap into to understand more about the quality of leads if we install software, a platform, and in our case, we use CallRail to match up that event. So this platform basically connects to your Google Analytics pixel and does caller ID lookup and sort of connects or forwards to your phone system. And then it also connects to your CRM. So it identifies that user when they make that phone call. It knows where they came from because it's tied to your Google Analytics. And then it sends all that data immediately into Salesforce. Actually, when that sales comes in, you can configure it, or when the call comes in, the person that's on the end of the phone, they have Salesforce open, that contact record's automatically there. And all they have to do is put notes on it. They don't have to enter in their phone number and all of that. They can validate that, right? And there's like big companies have sophisticated systems that do this for you, right? But we're talking at the small business level, and you just have a standard PBX, you're using like, AT&T or Xfinity and some simple phone system, you really don't have, much way of doing this. But CallRail, it's starting at like $40 a month, $50 a month, could give you access to this data. I was like, well, what if we did this? And that started in December. Like, what if we install this right before Christmas and we look at this? We had a 15-day trial. What if we look at this over the holiday? What would happen? You remember that, Mario? Like, do you remember like after the first of the year looking at the data, and what did you think at that point? Like,
I thought, why didn't we do this when Curtis told us to 2 years ago? It was almost scary that it was so eye-opening. Curtis has been advocating for us to get a call tracking system for 2 years. I mean, and we were terrified to do it because we said, geez, these people are going to call this unique number that gets assigned to them, and they're going to forget our corporate number, right? The customer is going to not know how to get a hold of us because the number changes all the time. And, we just had to give up that fear and just say, it's more worth it to track where these guys are coming from than the potentially negative consequence of them not knowing our number, right? Guys, just use Google. I mean, type in our company name, you'll find us, right? There's not, no, I don't think anybody's writing down our number on their hand, from a phone book or anything like that anymore. So, who knows? Maybe they are, but we think that this just was eye-opening for us. On the operations end, it was eye-opening. On the sales and marketing end, it was eye-opening. And to be honest, I would never go back to where we were, right? I would never say we should remove this system, because the data that it gives us is invaluable. We don't track our operators' phone conversations at all. We've never done that. However, CallRail does allow for calls to be monitored, and you can kind of listen to the operators or the salesperson or whomever is taking the call. You can listen to the conversation for training purposes. And again, we've never done it before, but CallRail allowed for it. So, our marketing and sales director and myself said, I wonder how these calls are being handled just one day, right? You're allowed to see this, you listen in on these. And what we found was shocking. I mean, it was absolutely shocking that the calls, it's a small to medium sized company. I mean, but we have about 30 people that the phone could go to, that a caller could get a hold of somebody in this company. And what we found is that some people, and it's not their fault, they're just not sales folks, right? Somebody calls in looking for care or looking for services. They would essentially not sell them on the care. Let's go into something else. Let me give you the price right away, right? The first 5 seconds, we're, $35 an hour, $30 an hour, and the customer got that info, and okay, and as we know, you don't give the price right away, right? You have to sell, right? That's you have to sell them on the value that your company presents. So how this boils down to, I mean, we lost probably 3 to 4 clients in a matter of 2 days that we tracked, these conversations essentially going nowhere. The customer, how did we know that we lost them? Well, because CallRail's good enough where we could see if they ever called back or if a call was made back to them. And we were listening to these conversations kind of gone wrong, and we said, whoa, like we extrapolated that data. Over 2 days, you lost 3 to 4 clients. Multiply that times 365 days in a year, right? It's a scary number, right? And so after we found that data, we had to make some operational changes in order to make sure that the calls were going to internal sales folks. And that had increased our conversion rate tremendously just from operational changes. And tremendously, I mean that we increased our conversion by 33% in quarter over quarter when we made that change.
Amazing. So we always have to point out we are not affiliate marketers with CallRail, so it's not that we are pitching CallRail. It's just we're pitching the concept behind it, and then more importantly, or as importantly, the processes and systems that have to follow on operationally. But just to step back, so you're talking about those lost opportunities that you are now tracking, but before you're even tracking it, you estimated that 30% of your web clients were out there, but because they called in, they weren't even being tracked at all. That's just dark data, right? Because you don't know if they called. No way
exactly.
So now that's another slice of revenue that you haven't accounted for. So have you done the math? So since then, can you look at like almost a whole year's data worth now and say, it's either increased our conversion rate by X much or increased the inbound traffic this much? What do those analytics say?
So we did the first 3 quarters of 2023 compared to the first 3 quarters of 2022. And I think Curtis has some of that data that we were just talking about.
Yeah. So total trackable conversions that we came into the system. So that was a 241% increase of data that we're actually converting. And I did this with another client. And I'll just kind of give you an example. Like you're like, whoa, how are you converting that many more? And so this sort of like real-time ability for the system to create that lead record was working with another client and listen to some of their initial phone calls that were coming in. Their teams were answering the phone call, answering all great questions for the prospect, leading them down where they needed to. And then it was like, you're going to come into our showroom on Monday. Great. We'll see you there. And hung up the phone and never asked for that person's contact info. And, that would have been like question number 1, or if not, question number 2, can I get your name and phone number? So in case we get disconnected, I call you back.
Right. And
so now they have no idea if that person is that the person who shows up on Monday, or is that somebody completely different? And did they, again, were they associated with some? So it's just yeah, if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. It sort of goes back to that. Well, we actually assisted in that process of making sure that it was going to make it into the CRM. So it was true. And so there's that 240% increase just initially there. And then we looked at what I guess we would call like the actual leads then that were convertible. So we might have a volume of records that are created, and we did ways of weeding out phone calls that would be unqualified. Say somebody's calling looking for a job, or it's uh, some telecom company who wants to sell you a new phone system, right? Those aren't being generated as leads. We want true leads. But then there's another level of which ones are the actually qualified leads that could lead to an actual sale. And that we saw an increase of 70%. And then on top of that, then we saw an increase of 80% of the web leads that were actually resulted in new business. So we closed 80%. So we've almost doubled closed sales from web. So we're kind of thinking, well, there could have been 30% before, maybe, that we just couldn't track. There was no attribution previously, so we couldn't track. So there's at least a 50% increase. And the other crazy thing is we didn't spend any more money doing this. This is entirely just implementing a very inexpensive technology and improving process. We look at this year versus last year, we're not spending any more money from a marketing perspective, and we're really not doing any different tactics. We might be in those tactics pulling some different levers because now we have access to some more granular data about what's working within the channels. But for the most part, the channels are exactly the same as they were a year ago. So it's pretty cool.
What this is, I'm going to finally reveal, I guess, in episode 3, what I find to be the Holy Grail. In Mario, this is way more unique than you would even give yourself credit for. But it's not always, having the best sales team. It's not always having the flashiest marketing campaigns or strategies. It's this closed loop that exists or should exist, but almost never does, between what the marketing folks are doing and having a transparency in terms of what leads are being generated, then a mutual transparency to say, once those leads come in, how are we operationally addressing them, and do we need to fix things operationally? So now we have marketing operations that lead to sales. And then usually if you get that far, which is rare, the data dies there because no one's feeding the sales data back into the marketing to tell them this lead closed, this lead was a great lead but didn't close, this was a horrible lead, we don't want any more people like this because they don't fit our customer profile. Because you could take all that data, which we'll come back to in a second, Curtis, and feed it into your marketing algorithms. But this closed loop, is this just your nature, Mario, or is this something you had to discover along the way, that there's too many holes between sales, operations, and marketing to get a full circle solution that's going to actually work, drive, and be measured?
Yeah, I think it was an aha moment when we implemented CallRail because, Curtis on a monthly basis would ask for data to come back so he could feed it to make the algorithm better and better. And what we noticed was that, geez, if we're losing 3 to 4 clients in 2 days, there's so much data that he's now losing, right? And, it's this perpetual problem. We can spend 50% more on marketing, 100% more on marketing, and guess what? The results will be no better because we didn't fix the internal sales process, right? And our sales process is a little longer than we'll call it like a product, an iPhone or soda or something that, a thing, a tangible thing. We're selling a service that people don't need right away, or they do need it right away. It's not a consumable good. It's a sort of a necessary service that requires some grooming, right, over time. But what was interesting, and we discussed it today, is that we have different marketing mediums, right? And there wasn't one fix all, right? Like Curtis said, we didn't spend any more in marketing in the web marketing this year than last year, but there's better results. We didn't spend more in PR this year than last year. Advertising commercials, radio, newspaper. We didn't spend more. As a matter of fact, we probably spent less, but we have more conversions, right? So, I mean, and this is a hypothesis, but it's like there's no one marketing channel that's like a fix all, right? That you should be responsible, hey, all these leads are coming in just because we spent more on the web or more on PR. There's no kind of one marketing attribution, but it is that one thing on your internal sales end that can ruin all of your marketing efforts, right? So if you're not actually capturing those leads, in our instance, it was going to the wrong folks, right? If you're not capturing the leads, if you're not actually solidifying what the client wants, and actually converting the client, getting it to the right people, almost all that marketing kind of goes to waste, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at least a significant part of it. And in Curtis's example, where the company that they just didn't ask for the phone number, right, or the email address, and folks were showing up at the showroom, and they didn't know if it was actually the people that they were marketing to. That's the exact example that we're talking about here. In our end, it was actual clients that we truly knew wanted service. They were sales qualified leads. They were convertible sales qualified leads. And because they were going to the wrong folks, we weren't able to convert them, right? And that all equals revenue, right? That's all the ROI that we spend on the marketing kind of going away, just because operationally it's going to the wrong folks internally.
So Curtis, why do you think there is this sort of invisible curtain between sales and marketing in most organizations? Why are they so afraid to share data back and forth? I mean, I have my own hypotheses, but I guess the bigger question is then how do you overcome those, whatever those apprehensions are? How do you overcome them, and why is it so important? I mean, I think we're demonstrating here as a case study, but just generally speaking, why do you demand these mutual accountability meetings? Well, demand's a strong word, but and ask for the data.
Yeah. Well, it's complex. I mean, and that may be the biggest thing with this. It takes time. And oftentimes an organization is driven by trying to fix things quickly or plug holes. We're behind on our numbers. And so we need to throw money at X in order to drive leads. Instead of taking a step back, looking at the big picture. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing is oftentimes we fall into the situation in marketing where a company needs to hit numbers and says, can you do X, Y, and Z because we need to get to this by the end of the quarter, by the end of the year, or in this next fiscal year, without taking a step back and saying, do we have the systems in place, not just from a marketing perspective, but inside the sales organization to do this all effectively? And so, if there's willingness in the organization to do that, and which is usually a champion, Mario's our champion at assisted living. If there's a champion in the organization that's willing to put those pieces together, then I think it can all come together. If there's not, then you'll have a chief revenue officer, a CMO, a CEO. You'll have somebody at that level who's just basically saying, no, we just need to put more money at this. Because we need to drive leads into the pipeline. And then from our perspective, we just feel like they go into a dark hole, and we don't get the information that we need.
I also find sometimes there's a misalignment of incentive. It should go without saying that marketing and sales at the end of the day should have the same end in mind, which is increasing revenue. But marketing has become so sophisticated that it can be seducing to chase the wrong metrics, say clicks or form fills you mentioned, right? Let's get form fills. Let's get some conversions into the funnel, where we're talking about a company now that has some percentage of their sales are going to come from a phone call because that's the most natural medium for that prospect to communicate with you, right? So if the metrics are how many clicks are we getting to the extent that you're ignoring the natural course, well, now marketing's going for clicks and sales are just going for closes, and the sales metrics, they're not looking beyond the close because once that's in the pipeline, they're on to the next thing, right? So how do we align, Mario, this is a question for you, maybe. How were you successful in aligning the sort of big picture incentives so that people aren't in vacuum saying, well, I hit my quota, I hit the clicks quota, and I hit my quota, it's the sales quota.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, actually. And it boils down to the accountability metric. Again, we don't measure clicks are nice and views and things like that are great. We measure our conversion rate and we measure is revenue coming in. And we pin incentives from sales all the way to marketing on those things, right? So I'll give you a great example. Our sales reps, our external sales reps are incentivized on how many clients that they bring in directly. Okay. They go out, they essentially foster relationships with referral sources, and they directly get the referral, and then they go and foster the relationship and convert that client. Now, our internal marketing and sales works in tandem, right? So there's no conflicting incentives, right? They're incentivized on all leads that convert internally from web, from calls from our PR efforts, from calls from our advertising efforts. They're incentivized in that respect, right? So there's not a competition, right, with marketing and sales. It works in tandem because they're incentivized in tandem, right? So when you create these incentives that actually have sort of nothing to do with each other, right, that you get people going after the wrong thing. I always look at business and KPIs sort of like pulleys, right? So if you incentivize one department, right, with this carrot, right, it weighs down this pulley and it lifts up this other one, right? So essentially, I like my incentives to balance each other out so that one department isn't going after something that actually at the detriment of the other department that it'll cause. Good example is our recruiting, right? We incentivize our recruiting in a similar fashion that we incentivize our sales efforts so that it balances out, right? And that's one thing that through the years we've experienced, and it didn't happen overnight. We've made many mistakes. I could tell you that our sales and marketing commission structure changed probably 6 times over the past 7 to 8 years, right? You guess and check, right? You get feedback from folks that worked here, and you come up with something over that amount of time that works really well. But I can say that a takeaway on that particular aspect of it is that it's not going to be perfect the first time. As a matter of fact, it's going to be very imperfect the first time you come up with a system. But you have to throw it away and redo them over and over again based on feedback that you get and based on, honestly, your results, right? Because at the end of the day, it's revenue and it's profit. And we need to invest that back into the processes.
So, Curtis, what is the final question for you? And then I have a final question for Mario. My final question for you is just kind of big picture. If you step back in all 3 episodes we've talked about, is there a major big lesson takeaway? So, if you could turn back the clock to when you started working with Mario, look at the entire chronology, what's the lesson? What is the lesson for most companies who might be, like you said, they come to you first, like maybe chasing a quota? Is it to step back, or what is the biggest lesson or takeaway?
I think you have to at some point. There's certainly times where you need to be focused on, okay, we're trying to generate revenue here because of X, Y, and Z, and so we're focused over here. But you do need to take time away, whether that's time when you're budgeting every year, whether that's time when you're working on strategic initiatives, look at systems, involve other people in the organization, have a plan in place, or put together a plan, have a culture in the organization that people are going to buy into that and follow along with it. And then have a partner, on the opposite end who, is willing to do that. And there has to be some level of trust and transparency. I mean, Mario's sharing me very intimate details of his business. He's got to have some level of trust to do that with me and the people at my organization. Yeah, there's a little bit of caution I think organizations should take with that. But if you have, again, the right people in place, you've selected the right partners, I think that, you can step into something like this, and maybe it only takes a year. But that year of building, what it could do for you down in the, in the long term. And I was just looking at numbers here as Mario was talking, like we actually have spent 4% less in what we're doing from a web and advertising perspective. It's 4% less than it was last year, with an 80% increase in new business. I mean, that's crazy. Who wouldn't take that?
Right.
But
yeah.
So, but we were able to put that sort of in place quickly because there was already the culture in place.
Yeah.
Mario was able to go into his organization and talk to sales and improve things because that culture already exists, that he can easily, change different levers. There's two levers we talk about pretty frequently, is the volume that comes in, and then that conversion rate. And it's not just the conversion rate on the website. That's the most common conversion rate we talk about in marketing, but it's conversion to sales qualified lead, and then from a sales qualified to what you could actually close as a new customer. There's actually multiple conversion rate points, and there's opportunities at each point to find areas of insight and optimization to understand what's happening in that funnel. And you have to get clarity in that funnel. You have to be able to measure it and look at each stage, drill down into that stage, and then be like, whoa, there's an anomaly here. What's causing that? What do we need to fix? And just think, if you're able to do that without waiting for the bleed to happen over a 6-month time period, that you could actually have data that was like, oh, yep, we've got a hole to plug, and we don't have to panic to plug that hole. We can talk to the right people. Oh, yep, we do see there's something wrong here. Let's do something about that.
Yeah. So I've heard you both preach patience. You both preach the value of sort of looking at data and responding to the data and learning from lessons. Mario, you keep saying it's not going to be perfect at first, but you're going to learn from it. So same question to you, Mario. And if you can, I want you to leave us with your Game of Thrones analogy, because it gets to patience in looking back. So now we're talking about, you guys, I think this whole journey started in 2017 or so. So 6 years later, and what did you have to say about Game of Thrones relevant to this conversation, Mario?
We're pretty much 6 years to the date too. I think we started working together in September of October. So it's like to the date almost.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it was a long time ago. A great journey though.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones analogy. I look back that long ago to where we were, and I think that we came so far. We've made so many mistakes. We've made so many fixes. It was a journey. I mean, and it still is. I mean, we're just getting started. But when I look at how long Game of Thrones was, and I go, oh man, like the first episode of that was so far away, like to where it finally ended with the well, I don't want to spoil the show, but I'm gonna blow it for everybody. But like it was just such a long series, and it was so intense, and every episode's an hour, and it's different characters are introduced and different things are done throughout it. I'm like, that's an epic right there, right? And I can relate it a little bit to, or a lot of it to, what we've done. I mean, we started from getting 5 clients on a good year through our web efforts, using very antiquated web platform, all the way to now where we're tracking where every single lead and phone call and little thing is coming from. It's just amazing, right? And to echo what you said, Tom, was that there's only one way to do it, and it's just to go forward with it. You have to try it. We had a lot of fear of wasting capital on different things, and I think that you don't have to go in it where you have to throw a ton of money in and let's see if it works. Let's throw a ton of money into it. You can do these things for relatively, relatively low capital. I mean, CallRail, for instance, or another system, right? Because we don't, you can, it's, a few bucks a month. I mean, just to try it out, right? To see if it works.
It's not pass
money.
or fail. That's the thing. Too many companies go into this. Sorry to interrupt, Mario. Which it's a pass or fail mentality. We'll know if it's working in 6 months, and if it doesn't, we're going to pull the plug. You can't do that. I'm going to let you have the final word, Mario. But just to point out, I am the only person I think in the world that has seen the first episode of Game of Thrones and nothing else. So if you tell me, okay, I loved it though, but now I'm looking at it and I'm like, all right, 6 episodes of this, an hour long. It's epic. Like, do I have the time and the patience to do all this? You ask me now, I say, I don't know. But once I get to the end, I'm going to look back at it and say, that was so worth it. And it went a lot quicker than I thought it would, that's your analogy, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to be in your seat, I would watch it. I would just be aware that, yeah, it takes a while and just enjoy the journey. I mean, that's my biggest takeaway. You have to try these things to really know what you have to fix. You don't know what you have to fix yet because you didn't try it, right? I'm just speaking to a broader audience about this type of thing.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I think we've told the complete story here in 3 episodes, and we kind of are like Game of Thrones. We got a 3-part saga, right? But maybe that's more like Star Wars. So thank you, gentlemen, for telling the success story. Hopefully people out there have gotten some things to take away and learn. If you haven't checked out the first 2 episodes, go do that. Either listen or watch the videos. And we'll thank everyone. And we'll be back soon with another episode of Bullhorns and Bullseyes.